welcome to Strictly Game Boy, the show all about, well, the Game Boy. I'm your host, Clay, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Bryan.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm Bryan, and I'm joined by Clay.
I am Clay.
How are you?
I'm good, dude. This is episode 0, which is pretty crazy.
Oh, man.
I don't know where you stand on episode 0s, but normally I'm a big fan of them.
It's fine. I mean, 0 is usually an absence of anything, but, I'll go with, breaking physics over, being correct.
Dude,
I don't know.
That's so deep. Yeah. I don't know. I like to take an episode before we jump into our first game review or whatever, just to kind of let the listeners at home know who we are and kind of what's going on. So I figured we'd take a quick, brief episode here just to introduce ourselves and let people know who we are. And so I figured, this show is all about Game Boy, so we should talk about what our history is like with the Game Boy. Obviously, you and I are both a bit older, so we grew up in the age of Game Boys. We weren't like people that played them later after they weren't a thing. So
when did you get yours?
I don't exactly remember. I know that my sister had one before I did, and which even at that time was kind of weird because she isn't a huge gamer and wasn't back then either, but she was the oldest of us four, and so my parents bought her a regular, gray Game Boy, and as well as a copy of Tetris and Super Mario Land.
Well, it came with Tetris.
Right. So she had that, and then I assume they also bought her Mario.
Well, Mario's right there. Why not?
Right. And so I assume that was probably closer to the launch of it. So that was when I first got to play it. I remember when we took a trip to Florida. I think it was my first time flying in an airplane, and I remember she had it. And there was a couple times where she was gracious enough to let me play. And Tetris was not my thing. I was a young boy, and puzzle games are stupid. So immediately I just went to, I think, Mario. That was kind of like, yep, this is my jam. And so it was maybe a year later, or maybe that same year. It's hard to remember when you're a kid. Time is kind of weird. I eventually did get a green Game Boy, which I don't think I realized at the time how cool it was, but
it was cool.
Yeah, I know now it's cool, but
Yeah.
back then I was like, oh, I'm just excited to have a Game Boy. I didn't really.
My best friend growing up had a green one.
Yeah,
I was jealous, but I had mine for longer than he had one. So
nice. Yeah, eventually one of my brothers got a green one, and so that probably diminished the cool factor a little bit. And then unfortunately at some point I sold it, and then just and a couple years ago I found another one in the wild and was like, well, I definitely need to have this because this was my sword. This is what I had on me at all times. And so I have one now, and I've got quite a few other Game Boys. I've started kind of collecting them. I've got a bunch of the original ones. I've got a yellow, a red, an original gray. I still need to get the rest of the colors, but I have those, and I have quite a few colors and a couple pockets. I just purchased a yellow pocket the other day that I'm really excited about, and I got that blue one, which is pretty cool. So I love me some Game Boys. So that's kind of my brief history. I mean, me and my siblings grew up playing it, and we would play it on long road trips and everything, and at my sister's sporting events, and so I got a lot of mileage out of our Game Boy games, and generally they're obviously cheaper than regular console games, so my parents probably bought those more often than other ones.
Plus, Game Boys were like $85 when they launched. Those colored ones were probably $70, I want to say, but by that point, the price had dropped a little bit.
Right.
My original one, I did not sell it. I threw it out.
What?
So Game Boy Pockets were a thing at the time. I think I probably had it. It was maybe like 10 or 11. I can't remember. But I'd had my Game Boy for like 3 or 4 years at this point. And the start button was getting kind of wiggy. It wasn't always working. It was starting to make me mad, and so in front of my mother, I would just like my Game Boy is broken and threw it in the garbage to expedite the process of getting a Game Boy Pocket.
Wow.
So it's something that I never would have done, but I was desperate for a new like Game Boy Pocket. So I did end up getting one. I think I had to wait like a month, but I got one. But yeah, I got my Game Boy in Florida during Christmas, and I think I was 7 years old. It was like 92 by this point, so it had been out for a few years. But yeah, I got Tetris with it. I got Kirby's Dream Land.
Yes.
Got to the level 4 boss that first morning, like almost immediately. I had been playing Tetris on my NES a lot, though. My mom loves puzzle games, so I played a lot of Tetris with her. So by the time I had my Game Boy, I was a savant. Okay, I was experienced.
Totally.
But yeah, oh man, I love my Game Boy. That thing went with me everywhere. Those are the years of putting AA batteries in the freezer because it supposedly makes them work again for a little while longer, and like all these little tricks to just find ways to get batteries. The easiest one was just to go to Grandma's house. She had AA's all over the place.
Nice.
So, but yeah, man, everybody carried a link cable on them at school so we could play like games against each other. It came in handy when Pokemon eventually came out, but I love me some Game Boy. I'm a big, Nintendo fan. I still have all of, except with the exception of my gray one, although I do have a new gray one, but I have all of my Game Boys that I've ever had, which I don't have a micro, but I think I have all the rest of them.
Yeah, I don't have a micro either.
But yeah, green pocket, purple color, and then a few different SPs. Yeah. But yeah, I love me some Game Boy, definitely.
Nice.
It's also nice because my aunt had a Game Boy before I did, and she had a Light Boy, and she had like 30 games. So if I was ever over at the grandma's house, I could just play any of her games.
Heck yeah. Awesome. Well, yeah, so for those of you guys that don't know, me and Bryan, we're buddies. We work together, actually. And so we spend about 40 hours a week together. And so, yeah, we spend a lot of time sitting at desks right next to each other and working together in a warehouse. So we had been talking for quite a while about, hey, we need to start our own show because we both have different shows that we do on the side. We'll talk about that at the end here. But so we're trying to decide what to do, and we had an idea for a podcast that we were going to do, and then kind of last minute we decided, hey, maybe we should do this instead. And I had done another Strictly show in the past all about the N64, and that's no longer a thing. That show has unfortunately died and hidden away. But we have this one, and so I figured, you know what? Let's just do a show all about the Game Boy, because who doesn't love the Game Boy? And there are a couple other podcasts that have done it in the past, but as far as I can tell, I could be wrong, there's not a whole lot, if any, still around. So I figured,
being really hard on us, man.
Yeah,
You take it easy on us. We're nice guys.
Yes, jeez,
We're nice podcasts.
And so I guess we'll throw a huge disclaimer out here. We're not the biggest Game Boy professionals in the world. We don't have all the answers or the knowledge. So we're just, two guys that love Nintendo and love, old video games, new video games. And so
just Gunpei Yokoi in general.
Yes, just that. Just him. And so we're going to give this a shot. And as we go, I think we'll learn and we'll become even smarter as far as, how this stuff works. So bear with us. We might say some things that are stupid or wrong, but just let us figure it out, and it should be good. So now we're just going to talk about kind of the format of the show, how this is going to work. Before we get into that, I think we should talk about what we're going to be covering on the show as far as Game Boy, because there is a very broad term of what Game Boy could consist of, because it could start from the very beginning all the way to the Game Boy Advance. I think is kind of where the Game Boy
was stretched from like 89 to like 2006 or something.
Right, which is a long time.
Yeah.
And so right off the bat, we decided we're not going to span that entire time because that is a lot of games. So Bryan, do you want to kind of share our thought process between what we're covering or behind it?
to the GBA, that is definitely its own thing. Like, we're gonna segment that off. If there's some day we get tired of doing strictly Game Boy, there's a million years worth of content to mine out of the GBA. So
yeah,
that is not included in this. But Game Boy Color has such a short kind of lifespan that we figured, you could just include it here. So we won't always be talking about like a Game Boy Color game, but they're fair game. So
yeah, I figured original Game Boy and Game Boy Color thrown in there because they're technically, still, I feel like they're the same thing. It's just kind of an upgraded version. Yeah, you can't play color games on the original Game Boy,
but then there are also black carts that are combo Game Boy Original and Game Boy Color functionality. So like, there's just this weird gray area between the two systems that it just felt right to include color in this.
Yeah. So there you go. It'll be, the show is called Strictly Game Boy, but it's also strictly Game Boy and Color, I guess, technically. So
however, whatever the size of the carts, that's what we should call it. Strictly this size Game Boy
this
carts.
Dimension, yes. So hopefully you, the listener, are cool with that. Like we said, we love the Advance, but we just decided it's kind of a beast of its own and deserves its own focus elsewhere some other time.
Yeah,
so,
if you want to find a Game Boy Advance fan, come find me because I love that system.
Yeah. So no disrespect to it. We just don't want to disrespect it by not giving it more attention, I guess. So there's that. And then real quickly, basically how we're starting out this show this way. This could all change weeks from now. Who knows? So the idea is that we will cover one game per episode, which is pretty straightforward, and that may change depending on how things go, but I think we want to not have this go way too long, and so hopefully one game per episode will be plenty, with some other things sprinkled throughout, like we mentioned, or whatever. And so that's kind of the goal, and then when we hit some of the bigger games, we'd like to have on some guest hosts, a few friends of ours, just to really dive deep on those big name games for the Game Boy. So that's kind of how we're going to start out with just one game per episode, like I mentioned, with some other goodies throughout the episode as well. We don't really have a time limit for how long these can go, but
when it's done,
it's done. Hopefully it'll be max an hour, but interjected throughout, we're trying to come up with some fun little things to kind of break up the little game reviews. So those will be coming. A couple things like we're gonna play a song of the episode, one song from a random game that we think is really cool. We might be playing some Game Boy commercials, things like that, just to kind of break it up, have a little more fun, and keep it loosey goosey, I guess. Any added things on top of that, Brian? I mean, you could.
No, we're weird. Things will be weird.
Yeah,
stuff will happen.
We're trying to encourage having a little fun with this, and this is us, reviewing games, but it's more a celebration of the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color, and so we want to enjoy that whole culture, that whole 90s vibe, and so we're gonna try to capture that and just have fun with it, because this isn't about just the games, but the consoles themselves. So that's kind of the goal. I could go into more details about how the reviews are going to go, but I mean, it's pretty straightforward. We'll go through the story if it has it. We'll go through the developer, maybe have some little interesting tidbits about the development time, and then we'll go through visuals, audio, gameplay.
I'll tell you about the secret storyline in Game Boy Tennis. It's wild.
I can't wait to hear about that. Yeah, no, I when we did Strictly 64, there was some games where you get to the story and you're like, Mario and his friends wanted to race go-karts, and
that's about it.
In some of these older games, you got to pull out a manual and look, and sometimes I have to Google manuals to see, like, is there a story? because some
there's
games,
usually a story.
Some games they're like, we're not going to put it in the game. We're just going to type it out in a little booklet because it's way quicker.
Memory
that way.
space,
right? And so we'll have to keep an eye on those. But
yeah.
Other than that, I think that's a pretty good explanation of the show. Did I miss anything, Brian?
I think you did very well.
Thank you. I'm not trying to hog the spotlight here,
No.
but so real quick before we wrap this up, this is going to be a really long episode. Brian, why don't you tell them, the listeners, a little bit about yourself, maybe some of the other shows that you're part of, what you do.
Well, I'm a Leo.
Interesting.
No, I'm just I've been playing Nintendo games ever since I can remember, which is like the late 80s. I played all sorts of video games, but Nintendo is my one love. I do some writing, podcasting. My website with my crew is trifarce.com. We most notably we have a Zelda book club style podcast called Chat of the Wild, and I also help out with something that Clay and I are both going to talk about, which is Nintendo Village, and I do reviews from time to time for them, and it's a cool little YouTube community that you should check out.
Yeah, well put. All right, well, so yeah, definitely check his other shows out. They do good stuff, good work, great shows. I'm very similar. I unfortunately spread myself a bit too thin at times, so I have multiple shows that I do. Right now I am a part of a somewhat regular show called Switch Talk, which is it's a audio podcast, but it's also like a video YouTube show podcast where we talk about the latest and greatest Nintendo Switch releases. We just kind of pick some, about 2 a month. So it's not a super regular show. So there's that one. I also do a show called Mouse Bites, which is all about Disney video games. And so I do that one every 2 weeks. And so you can also check that one out. And then I do this one. And, oh yes, and I do Nintendo Nostalgia, which is a show all about old games and the nostalgia we have with them. So that one is over on dayspace.com, but my other 2 shows that I mentioned are also on Nintendo Village, thenintendovillage.com, or on their YouTube. You can check them out there. So last thing, this show is, I guess, sponsored or hosted at least by Nintendo Village, and you'll be able to find all the episodes for this show on www.thenintendovillage.com. You'll also be able to find these on iTunes as well as the Nintendo Village YouTube channel. So if you're listening and you want to watch, we will have videos up there which will have gameplay over top of each episode. Also, if we play a commercial or something, we'll put that on there. So sometimes you'll be listening and go, I'd kind of like to watch a video version. It'll be there. I know listening to podcasts on YouTube is kind of weird, but it'll be there. If you don't like that, we're on YouTube, and you can find it all there. So there's also a lot of other great shows, YouTube shows and podcasts on the NintendoVillage.com. So definitely check that out. And
we're pretty cool guys.
Yeah, and we have some good friends, and we do a lot of reviews there, mostly for indie Switch titles and some first-party ones. So if you love Nintendo, check it out. There's some good people there. So other than that, I think that's about it for episode 0. I think we should wrap this up so we can jump into episode 1. What do you think?
Yeah. Let's do it.
All right. Well, we're gonna get off here, guys, and we're gonna play you out with some Game Boy music. So, say goodbye to the people, Brian.
I'd say hello to all your pretty children for me.
That's creepy.
Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe, check out some of our other videos, and visit thenintendovillage.com, your home for everything Nintendo.